Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Andrews, and also known as the Bard of Ely, a place in Cardiff where I used to live. And today I'm going to be talking to you about butterflies, the magic of butterflies, which just so happens to be the title of my new Moon Books book. And it's actually the magic of butterflies and moths, because what goes for butterflies goes for moths too. So let's get started. Well, I thought, a good place to start is actually where I began with my interest in butterflies and moths. And it began when I was a little boy. That was when I fell in love with nature when I was really little, about four, and what happened with me is I would go out in the garden and I'd find things in the garden. There's flowers in the garden and bees in the garden and birds in the garden and butterflies in the garden. And so I just saw all these creatures and I thought they were all amazing. And so I told my parents, I said, Mum, Dad, all of this nature, these insects and these birds and the flowers, I love all this stuff. So, they started giving me books, and they gave me books they already had, and they bought me new books. But let me show you this, because this is amazing. I've still got some of these books. This book was published in 1946. You can see it there. And this is The Insects of the British Isles. Now you can see butterflies. Yeah, there's all those butterflies there. And I turn the page. There's some more butterflies. And so this is the kind of book I was looking at when I was a small boy. And they were buying me other books as well. They used to buy me what were called the Observer's books. And there's a picture of some moths. And so all of this was how I was learning. And I was very lucky because my dad used to take the family out in the car for trips into the countryside. So we'd go to different places. We'd go to woodlands and we go to lakes and we go to rivers and we go to the seaside sometimes and we go to moorland and hillsides, all different types of countryside. And so for me, I'd find all different types of wildlife there. I'd find all different types of butterflies there and caterpillars. And the reason I mention caterpillars is because this is so important, not just only because of the magic that we all see, and I'll explain what I mean by that, is I think everybody can see the magical transformation of you. You start with an egg, then you become a caterpillar, a long, thin, crawly thing. And then you become a chrysalis if you're a butterfly, and if you're a moth, you become a pupa in a cocoon. And then when you've done all that, you transform completely into this winged creature with maybe very colorful wings, and you can fly about in the sunlight if you're a butterfly. And so all of that is pretty magical. And so that's what, for me, I think is one of the first things that we can call magic about butterflies. And the caterpillar is where I started to really learn. Because when I was a little boy, I'd find caterpillars and I was fascinated by them. And maybe they were furry caterpillars, and maybe they were striped, maybe they were green, all different colors that they come in. And I'd think, well, I'd like to actually look after these caterpillars. So I used to keep them in a jam jar. And I would learn from the books that I had, which were the books important, what to feed the caterpillars. And that's important because like a lot of people, they all know, everybody knows caterpillars eat leaves, and they do, it's true. But what is important is the different types of butterfly, different types of moth, they may have specific plants that the caterpillars need. And I'll talk more about this later. But anyway, what I'm saying is when I was a little boy, I learned that you have to give the caterpillars the right type of leaves to feed on. And my gran and my granddad, they lived up the road, and I used to visit them a lot. And this was fantastic. It was part of my learning experience as well, was that they had in their garden, they had a bush called the flowering currant. And on the flowering currant bush, I found two types of caterpillar. And both these caterpillars and both the moths, they're moths, species of moth, are in my book. And the one caterpillar is what we would call a looper caterpillar because it makes like a little loop as it walks. In America, you call them inchworms. And they were of the magpie currant moth. And if you disturb them, they can kind of hang down on a little thread, and then they kind of somehow or other kind of roll themselves back up that thread to get back onto the leaves. Anyways, to find those, and I found another little caterpillar, which was really pretty, of a moth called the vapor moth. And in America, you call them the rusty tussock moth. And they were fascinating. And so I used to take these caterpillars home and put them in a jam jar and feed them with the leaves of the flowering currant. And eventually, they would turn into the moth species that they were. But first of all, they'd have to change into a pupa in a cocoon. And so all of that was, what I'm saying is that was how I began to learn about looking after caterpillars. And there were lots more caterpillars about when I was a boy. We used to have a lane behind the houses where we lived, and there were patches of stinging nettles on the railway bank. And on the railway bank, in the patches of stinging nettles, I used to easily find small tortoiseshell caterpillars, big nests of them. And I mention this because, again, this is important because the stinging nettle is a food plant for lots of different types of caterpillars. And in the UK, also, where I am now in Portugal, it's a food plant for the red admiral butterfly and for the peacock butterfly, which just happens to be in my book and actually on the cover of my book. You can see there the peacock butterfly. And so the stinging nettle is the plant for those caterpillars. So I used to find those. And there was something that, for me was exciting. And I shouldn't technically have done this because you're not supposed to cross the railway line, certainly when you're a little boy. But on the other side of the railway line, there was a place we used to call the coal yard. And it was an old coal sidings that they stopped using. And it had grown wild, and I used to go over there, and it was fantastic. I used to call it the coal yard. It was only a couple of acres of land, but, and this is important, there were so many different types of butterfly that lived there. There was the grayling butterfly, there was the wall brown butterfly, which is now quite uncommon, to find that in the UK. There was the meadow brown butterfly, the gatekeeper butterfly, the common blue, the small heath, the small copper, and the red admiral and the small tortoiseshell. You could find those over there, the peacock, and the white butterflies, the large white butterfly and the small white butterfly. So that's a lot of butterflies, all that could be found in a couple of acres of ground on the other side of the railway bank in the coal yard. And the reason I mention that is because it's also, for me, it was one of the first examples I had of habitat destruction, of an area of wildlife habitat that is no longer there. And what happened, unfortunately, for the coal yard was that one day they decided to build all over it. And if you go there today, you wouldn't know there was a coal yard once there with all these butterfly species. There's a little road, and there are housing blocks there, and neatly manicured lawns and a couple of trees growing in these lawns, and that's it. But the wildlife habitat that was once there, it supported all those butterflies and moths, and that's gone. That was long gone. It went when I was a child. And I mention that because it's very important, very, very important, that we provide what we can for the butterfly species and the moth species and the rest of wildlife, to be able to live in and to feed from. And what has happened over the years is, and this is a problem all over the world, we're losing wildlife habitat. And so what we can do, though, is if we have gardens, if we have a garden, we can help because we can grow plants in our gardens. And what I was thinking, really what it comes down to is everybody knows about butterflies need flowers, and indeed they do. They need flowers because that's what they feed from. A butterfly will land on a flower, it sips the nectar from the flower. And so people think, well, if we grow some nice flowers in our garden, that'll help the butterflies, and it will, and that's true. But if we grow some plants for the butterflies' caterpillars, it's even better. And I just mentioned one plant, the stinging nettle, and people don't like stinging nettles. Kind of understandable because you can get stung. But the stinging nettle, people think it's a weed as well, and it's not very pretty. It's just a green plant, hasn't got any nice colorful flowers or anything. So people don't like stinging nettles, but it's the food plant of so many different caterpillars. I mentioned a few: the red admiral, the peacock butterfly. It's the peacock butterfly. The small tortoiseshell, the painted lady, the comma butterfly. All of those, the caterpillars can eat the stinging nettle. So if we've got a garden and we can have a little patch of stinging nettles in that garden, that's going to potentially help the butterflies. And then there are other plants. And I'm coming to like where I live. Where I live today, I live in Portugal. And this house that I'm living in, I happen to live in the top floor. My landlord lives on the bottom floor, and we have a garden. And he's learned from me, why I'm growing certain plants and what these plants are for when it comes to butterflies. So he lets me have a nettle patch here. And there's something which I wanted to share with you, which is pretty incredible. And we use the term magic and the magic of butterflies and moths. I think it's pretty magical how these insects can follow like a seasonal calendar, and how they know when something, should be happening in nature that they need. And something happens here every year. It's amazing. I've been in Portugal 8 years now. But I could almost guarantee that if I go out to a little patch of forest near where I live on the 31st of October, Halloween, Samhain, that particular time of year, that I'm going to find red admiral butterflies sunning themselves in a clearing in the wood. And the reason this is particularly amazing is because they have timed it so well that they have arrived here in Portugal, in this town that I live in this particular piece of forest, at the right time for when what is called the annual nettle starts to grow here. And they need that for the caterpillars. It's like the stinging nettle, but it's a bit different. It's the annual nettle. And what happens is in Portugal, we get the rains in the autumn. And when the rains come, that starts the annual nettle growing. Now, if you think like a female butterfly, if you're a female butterfly, you have to find the plants that you need to lay your eggs on. If you're a red admiral butterfly, female, you got to find the annual nettle or the stinging nettle. Where I live, there's plenty of annual nettles coming up as long as we've had any rain in the autumn, and they're normally growing by the 31st of October, Halloween. And so the red admirals arrive then, and not only do they arrive then, they stick around. So they're here through November, they're here through December, they're here through January, they're here through February, and they can produce 2 generations of butterflies using the annual nettles that are growing at that time of year. Now, we're in March now. In March in Portugal, it starts to get warmer, and the ground starts to get drier and the plants start to die back, and the annual nettle is more or less failing now. So it's no good for the red admiral butterfly. So what do? They leave Portugal. They fly. Some of them go all the way to the UK. The red admiral butterfly is what you call a migratory butterfly. So it can fly a long way, and it will do that because it knows it's no good here now. There aren't any annual nettles. And I think all that's amazing. I think it's amazing like how it knows when to arrive here in Portugal, when to leave, how to fly a long way. For example, the Red Admiral is flying right across the sea to the UK. And these are just some of the things, the amazing things which butterflies do. But getting back to what I was saying about my landlord Luis, that he learned that I grow stinging nettles here, or annual nettles, for the Red Admiral butterflies. He also knows that I have a plant called rue, which here in Portugal they call it aruda. And he told me years ago, he said, well, Steve, people in Portugal, they believe that if you grow the rue plant near your house, it keeps evil away. It's a good luck thing to grow this. And I thought, well, it's very good luck for the butterflies, because the butterfly caterpillars, or the swallowtail butterfly, they can eat it. So we have rue growing in the garden here. We have nettles, annual nettles, and we have milkweed, because I grow milkweed. That's for the monarch butterflies. And excuse me a minute. And the monarch butterfly is a good example of a species that specifically needs specific plants, because the monarch butterfly, the caterpillars will only eat milkweeds, types of milkweed. And I'm coming to the monarch butterfly because I think maybe in the world, maybe the monarch butterfly is probably the most famous of all butterflies. I think everybody's heard of the monarch butterfly, and people know about the amazing migration it makes. And wow, what an amazing migration it makes. It goes all the way from the lower states of Canada and the most northerly states of America, all the way down to Mexico and to California and Florida. And it does that every year. It's a long way. And its trigger for that is in the autumn, when it starts to get cooler and the days start to get shorter and the winter is starting to set in. It's no good, for that butterfly. It's too cold there. The plants it needs, the milkweed, is no longer growing. It's no good. So what does it do? It's evolved this over the years, over a very long time. It's evolved the behavior of migrating all the way down to the south to where it's warmer. And so most people know about that, and that's amazing. And there's a lot of people in America that are growing milkweeds, specifically to give a food plant for the caterpillars for the monarch. And something that I wanted to say about the monarch butterfly, which people don't realize, is that this is the American monarch butterfly. And the American monarch butterfly as well, if you're an American monarch butterfly and you happen to be emerging as an adult butterfly in the fall, as they call in America, in the autumn, you have to make your migration then down to the south, but you've got maybe November, December, January, February, all those months ahead of you that you're staying down there through the winter, fairly dormant, before you reverse it all by flying north again in the spring. If you're a monarch butterfly, and you're born in the summer, you don't get all those months. You only get a few weeks. So if you like, it's to your advantage if you're one of the monarch butterflies that happens to be of the generation that emerges in the fall, in the autumn. And what I found, which was incredible, that, I saw all this happening, was I lived in Tenerife in the Canary Islands from the end of 2004 through till 2014. And monarch butterflies there, it's quite a common butterfly. You see them flying about. But the monarch butterflies there, they don't need to migrate, you see, because it stays warm enough all year round. So they don't need to fly south. And so they don't live very long. They've only got a few weeks. And so what I'm saying there is that the monarch butterfly female, she lays the egg hatches in a few days, turns into the caterpillar's got about 10 days, then it's got about 10 days as a chrysalis, then it's a butterfly's got a couple of weeks. So it's a much quicker cycle of life. And it's all evolved, because of where they're living in Tenerife and the Canary Islands. But I've got you a story. I've got a story from Tenerife, which is pretty magical and for me was amazing. And I mention this in my book, The Magic of Butterflies and Moths, and it was pretty magical. What happened was that I used to live in an apartment and I had pet cat. I call my cat Tiggy. She used to go out on the balcony, the terrace. I had pots of milkweed plants growing out there. Now this worked. It attracted monarch butterfly. They came there to find the right plant they needed. The female butterflies would lay their eggs on the milkweed plants. Anyway, but what happened one day, a female monarch butterfly, she arrived. She found the milkweed plant. She started laying her eggs on it. And oh no, my cat Tiggy spotted her. Tiggy dashed out there, jumped on the butterfly. I saw this happen. Oh no. And I grabbed Tiggy. I pushed her back. I grabbed the butterfly that was on the floor on the balcony. And I thought, oh no, it's dead. And then I also saw that it's got a wing missing. So it had been injured, damaged, and it appeared to be dead because it wasn't moving. And I thought, oh no, Tiggy, you've killed the monarch butterfly. Well, it's not your fault. This is what cats do. But anyway, I picked the butterfly up and I put it on this wall just above the area of the balcony. And then something amazing happened. It flew away. It wasn't dead. It was just playing dead. So I learned in that moment that the monarch butterfly can play dead. It can appear that it's dead. It's not moving. And maybe if you were a predator, you'd be fooled. You'd think, well, it's passed over. It's no good. Don't need to do any more. But it was actually okay. It flew away. And what was the most amazing about that, which I've already told you, it had a wing missing. So it was only a 3-winged monarch butterfly, but it was able to fly. Now you might think, okay, it's learned its lesson. It's learned that this is a dangerous place to be for a monarch butterfly. There's this creature which can pounce on you, which we call a cat. So better not go there again. But did it learn that? No, not at all. Within about half an hour after it had flown away, it came back. And by then, I'd moved the milkweed plants up onto the wall out of the way, so my cat couldn't get up there because she couldn't get that high. And the monarch butterfly came back. It was a female monarch butterfly. As I've explained, she started laying her eggs on the milkweed plant. And I knew it was her because she only had 3 wings. And then this continued every day for the next 10 days or so. Every day that monarch butterfly would come back and she'd lay her eggs on the milkweed plants in the pots up on the wall. And I think that says a lot. It says a lot for monarch butterfly, how important it is that it does what it's supposed to do in life. If you're a female, you're supposed to find the right plants and lay your eggs. And it also shows, if you like, almost like a courage that monarch butterfly had, because it wasn't worried about there being a cat there. It knew what it had to do and it would come back there. So I wanted to share that little story with you about monarch butterflies. And I also wanted to share, which is important, the fact that I learn from my experiences, and I'm learning all the time. And learning is what is important. And what I was saying about my landlord has learned from me that the annual nettles are for the red admirals and the aruda, the rue, is for the swallowtail, and the milkweeds, which I grow, are for the monarchs. And so what I'm trying to do in my book, there it is, and talking to you now, is I'm trying to pass on information so that you can learn, so that we can all know a bit more about what we can do to help the butterflies and moths. And I've explained, I think, that, it's a matter of the right plants. We need to grow the right plants in our gardens. And it's actually interesting because there were some plants, people don't realize this, there were some butterflies that the caterpillars eat plants that you might not associate with butterflies or caterpillars. There are a lot of butterflies, the caterpillars eat grass species. Okay, so it can even mean that even growing a patch of grass in your garden, not a lawn, but actually quite long grass, that can help some species of butterflies. In the UK, there are a lot of butterflies that need grass. There's the meadow brown, there's the ringlet, there's the gatekeeper, the marbled white. All of those, speckled wood, all of those, the caterpillar eats grass. And I think it's important as well that we find out about the local species. So, what I mean by that is if we're growing the plants for the butterflies that live in our area, then we're going to help the butterflies that live in our area. And this is what we could be doing. And I haven't a clue. I don't know what butterflies are in your area, wherever you are, if you're in America or if you're in the UK or if you're in Europe or wherever you are. You probably got, different butterflies. And one thing that I do mention in my book is that if we want to, do something to help, we can get in touch with organizations in the countries where we live and take part in any events that they may be holding. I got here, and I mentioned this organization in my book. This is an example of a butterfly conservation survey. And they do this in the UK, and this is a lot of different species. And what they do is that they're basically asking the public to help by the public you can just go out and walk for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, wherever you live, and see what species you can find. And then you send the results into butterfly conservation, and they have a more accurate picture of what species are doing okay in the UK, and maybe what species are not doing so okay. And it's very unfortunate that actually worldwide, there's a whole lot of species of butterflies and moths are not doing very well at all. In fact, I saw like a recent results from Britain was that 80% of species are declining. That's a lot of species. And so, I think it's important that we all do what we can to help the butterflies. And through my life, I've been sharing my knowledge, and I'm a writer, as you know. And I've been writing articles. Like this was an article I wrote, Butterfly Gardening. This was for a magazine, the Mediterranean Gardening Outdoor Living, I used to write for. And it's all about, as I say, it's all about the plants that we need. We need plants for nectar, for the adult butterflies to feed from, and we need plants for the caterpillars to feed from too. And when it comes to the moths, it's the same thing. Adult moths, they may feed from flowers, and the caterpillars, they eat different plants. And some of the moths, though, are just absolutely amazing. And I learned about this, and so it's part of what I think of as the magic of it all. There are some moths that they don't eat anything at all. And you think, well, how do they survive? Well, they survive on all of the food they ate as a caterpillar. That's given them enough energy, enough reserves in their body to live for a while as an adult. And some of them are huge moths, some of the biggest moths in the world, like the Atlas moth. And that's maybe, the kind of size of two hands. The Atlas moth is a huge silk moth. That cannot feed. And there are many, many more. There's the giant peacock moth, which lives over here in Portugal and in other parts of Europe. There's the emperor moth, which lives in the UK. And in Americas, the robin moth and the moon moth. These are all really big, very attractive moths, but they can't feed. But there was a moth that I found out about that it's in this category when I was a child, and I've already told you. It's called the vapor moth, the rusty tussock, very pretty caterpillar. When it becomes an adult, if it's a female, it can't feed, but not only can it not feed, it can't fly either. So it looks more like a grub than a moth. And I learned about that when I was a child, and it was important for me to learn about all these different things. And the world of nature, as far as I'm concerned, is magical. It is just amazing. Some of it is like you couldn't make this stuff up. And an example of that I'm about to give you is there was a very large moth. It's the death head's hawk moth. And I think maybe I showed it to you earlier. Actually, I showed it to you. It's in my book. It's in my book. If I can find it. The death head's hawk moth, when it becomes an adult, there it is. There's the death head's hawk moth. When it becomes an adult, because it's only got a short proboscis, a short tongue, it can't feed from flowers, and it feeds on honey. And so it's also known as the bee robber, and it has to find a beehive, and it has to manage to get into the beehive and steal the honey. That's what the death head's hawk moth does. But as a caterpillar, it's actually quite a lucky caterpillar because it's got lots of different plants that it can eat. And some of the plants it can eat are really poisonous. For example, it can eat nightshade, and it can eat thorn apple. That is chura plant. And it can also eat potatoes. So as a moth, it's got a very, very big caterpillar. It's got a caterpillar that can eat various poisonous plants. And as an adult moth, it has to raid beehives and steal honey. And it can squeak. So that's pretty strange. You don't expect a moth to be able to squeak. And it's got this like skull and crossbones marking on the back of its thorax. So it's a very strange moth, and there are very many very strange moths and very strange habits that they have. And something I mentioned as well in my book is that, people think about butterflies and we think butterflies, they like warm, sunny days and flowers, and which is true, they do, most of them do. But there are actually some butterflies that live up in the Arctic Circle, in the very cold areas. They manage to survive up there. There's a Lapland fritillary. And so I've mentioned some of these butterflies as well, because I think it's just incredible. I think it's incredible that butterflies have managed to colonize, so many different parts of the planet. Just like we have, just like people have, we're I think probably the most successful species. We've colonized the entire world. Well, the butterflies have had a good go at it as well, but you can find butterflies in Alaska and Lapland and Siberia, and you can find them in the warm places and the tropical places as well. But all of them, the butterflies all around the world, they could all do with a helping hand from us. So we need to be growing the right plants for them. We need to have butterfly gardens with the nectar-filled plants for the adult butterflies. We need to support local organizations that are doing what they can to help butterflies. And I've made a list of some of these in my book. And I wanted to I've got this this is an example of butterfly conservation. I showed you one of their surveys. There's one of their magazines. And it's got a blue butterfly on it. And now there is a blue butterfly that I must tell you about, because I said earlier, like, you couldn't make this stuff up. There are blue butterflies, whereas the caterpillars, yes, the caterpillars eat leaves. This is what you would expect, something normal. But then at the stage in the caterpillar's life, it stops eating leaves. And it has to be found by a specific type of ant species. Okay? And there is a very rare butterfly, the large blue, which is in my book. And it became so rare in the UK, it became extinct, but they've managed to reintroduce it. And this butterfly, the caterpillar, at a later stage in its life, it has to be found by a specific type of ant, and the ant, instead of killing it, the ant picks it up and takes it to its nest. And the caterpillar lives out the last stage of its life before it becomes a chrysalis, living in an ant's nest. And then the chrysalis, it makes its chrysalis in the ant's nest. And then when it changes into the butterfly in the final transformation, it has to make its way out of the ant's nest, into the sunshine, hopefully outside, where it becomes the adult butterfly. And that's the large blue. And there are other species in the blues, and they do a similar kind of thing, that they have to have the right types of ant species, and the ants have to find the caterpillars, and they have to take them into their nests, and that is how they live. And that's pretty strange stuff. I'm sure you'll agree. So there are so many different things which go on in the world of butterflies and in the world of moths and their caterpillars and how they live, their life cycles, and all the different places around the world where they live. Now, I've shared a lot of information with you there, and what I'm going to get to now is I'd just like to show you this. I told you earlier, I often write articles, but sometimes I end up in articles, like in this article. It says, "Catch the Bug, Special World of Insects for Steve." And in the article it says, "Bugman Steve Andrews loves coming eye to eye with the insect world. The self-confessed creepy-crawly lover has a tank full of giant Madagascan hissing cockroaches in his Ely home." And that's what that is. It's a giant Madagascan hissing cockroach. But the reason I'm telling you all this is because I'm going to play you a song. To end my talk, I'm going to go out with a song which I think you will all enjoy, and I hope you have enjoyed. Oh, I see a comment is coming, in a cinnabar moth. Well, I'm just going to talk. Hannah, thank you for mentioning the cinnabar moth. The cinnabar moth is actually is in my book. The cinnabar moth is a moth which is using warning colors, because its caterpillar is poisonous. The moth is poisonous. Because it eats a poisonous plant, the ragwort. And the warning colors, the caterpillar, it's orange and black stripes. The moth is black and red, warning colors, which is basically saying, don't eat me. And that's something else, which I mention in my book. But now I'm going to get back to my song. And I've shown you the newspaper article about me. And the reason I did that was because in the second verse, I sing, "They called me the Bugman in the news one time. They called me the Bugman in the news one time. They called me the Bugman in the news. A hissing cockroach on my head got plenty of views. They called me the Bugman in the news one time." And that's where that's from, because they really did call me the Bugman, as you've seen. And I really did have a Madagascan hissing cockroach on my head at that particular point in time. So now we're going to do the song. And before we do the song, and I say we because in the last verse, I say, make a butterfly. And this is how, if you'd like to join with me, this is how you make a butterfly. And you can flap your wings like that, making a butterfly. And I'm going to put and by the way, I do rear butterflies. I think I maybe mentioned, the red admiral butterflies and the monarchs. And so I do look after them. And sometimes I really have had butterflies in my beard. So there's a butterfly in my beard. It's a monarch butterfly. And now we're going to do my song, Butterfly in My Beard. And when I get to the last verse and I say, make a butterfly and fly with me, this is how you make butterflies. So let's all do it. Let's all enjoy Butterfly in my beard. I had a butterfly in my beard, oh yeah, oh yeah. I had a butterfly in my beard, oh yeah, oh yeah. I had a butterfly in my beard. It looked pretty strange, it looked pretty weird. I had a butterfly in my beard, oh yeah, oh yeah. They called me the bug man in the news one time. They called me the bug man on the news one time. They called me the bug man in the news. A hissing cockroach on my head, it got plenty of views. They called me the bug man in the news one time. And now we've reached the butterfly making verse. So if you can all join with me by making some butterflies, put your hands together and make a butterfly. Okay, make a butterfly and fly with me. Say yeah, say yeah. Oh, make a butterfly and fly with me. Say yeah, say yeah. Make a butterfly and fly with me. Go anywhere at all, be really, really free. Make a butterfly and fly with me. Say yeah, say yeah, say yeah. Well, we're gonna do it one more time because you all know how to make butterflies now. So let's all do this. Let's all make butterflies together. Oh, make a butterfly and fly with me. Say yeah, say yeah. Oh, make a butterfly and fly with me. Say yeah, say yeah, 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 yeah. Make a butterfly and fly with me. Go anywhere at all, be really, really free. Make a butterfly and fly with me. Say yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was Butterfly in My Beard. I'm Steve Andrews. I hope you've enjoyed my talk, and this is my book, Butterfly, The Magic of Butterflies and Moths. Thank you.